Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Luke Sison. I'm the curator in charge of European Sculpture and Decorative Arts here at the Met, coming up to my first year's anniversary. You can hear from my accent that I wasn't born in New York. On the contrary, I was born, I suppose, about a few 150 miles from Houghton in Norfolk. I wish I'd been born nearer. It's one of the most beautiful places that I know in my native land. And its beauties are going to be enhanced next year by something very exciting that you'll hear about more this evening. We are honoured, I think, this evening to be joined by the owner, I should say, I think the loving owner of that beautiful house, David, Marquess of Cholmondeley. And I'm very pleased to welcome both David and his wife Rose here this evening. I don't want to preempt what David's going to say, but I also want to greet our other speaker, our main speaker perhaps I should say, Thierry Morel. Thierry, despite his name, is a thoroughly British product, I'm pleased to say, who is now the director of the Hermitage Foundation in the UK, but is a product of both our great universities. His doctorate taken at Oxford and teaching until quite recently at Cambridge. So, David, can I welcome you to the platform?
Thank you very much, Luke. Since coming to Houghton, I used to come every summer to stay with my grandmother, and it was always this place of great mystery, Houghton, to me, beauty and mystery. And I think I've always tried to imagine Houghton in the time of Sir Robert Walpole, the beginning of the 18th century, with fires blazing downstairs and in the state rooms, great gatherings of politicians and sport and hunters. So they hunted every day in the autumn, and talked politics in the evening, and drank a great deal. Hundreds of candles burning in the gilt chandeliers. And above all, one thought of what the house would have been with these great masterpieces by Van Dyck and Rubens and Poussin and Claude. But I would never have envisaged it possible, this dream of seeing the paintings actually in the rooms, even for a short time. If it hadn't been for Thierry Morel coming to me with this seemingly fantastical suggestion about 2 years ago, of bringing the paintings back from Russia. But this is indeed what will be happening in May next year for 5 months, and it's really due largely to Thierry's unshakable belief in the project, but also to Dr. Mikhail Piotrowski, director of the State Hermitage Museum, who's really never wavered in his support for the project, and also a number of other Russian museums, as well as the National Gallery in Washington, who are lending 2 paintings, and the Metropolitan, who have drawings of Houghton, and also some of the Walpole silver. So we're enormously grateful to the Met for this, and also for arranging this evening's talk. We've also had great support in England from our own Department of Culture, who are granting us government indemnity, as well as from a number of trusts and foundations. And last week we heard that the Prince of Wales has agreed to become royal patron of the exhibition, which is wonderful news and really a great honour. I should perhaps tell you that I've been looking after Houghton now for over 20 years, since the death of my grandmother, Sybil, who'd been chatelaine for 60 years. She was a remarkable lady in many ways, and it's very much thanks to her care and knowledge that the house and collection came to me in such good condition. She certainly imparted her affection for the place to me at an early age, and I hope I can pass this on at least to my children, and of course to my wife Rose. My family, in fact, came to Houghton through the marriage of the young 3rd Earl of Cholmondeley to Sir Robert's daughter, Mary. And it was their grandson, the 4th Earl, who inherited the house and estate after the death of the last surviving son of Sir Robert, Horace. Horace was the great letter writer and builder of Strawberry Hill, as many of you will know. The 4th Earl of Cholmondeley saved the wonderful Kent furniture, as well as the bronzes and antiquities, in fact everything that remained after the sale of the paintings, because everything, the whole contents was going to be sold by the Walpole trustees, as there were still enormous debts at the end of the 18th century. And the young Lord Cholmondeley borrowed money from his mother and sold his own house and paid a sum of £10,000 for the Kent furniture. So we have a lot to thank him for, really, in the history of Houghton. But of course he only lived at Houghton for a few years before moving back to Cheshire, the family estate, where he then built a sort of cross between a villa and a castle in the Gothic style, very much influenced by Horace, his great uncle. So Houghton then became the proverbial white elephant. It was constantly on the market for the next 100 years. It was offered to the Duke of Wellington after the Battle of Waterloo, but he found it was too far from London. And later, 50 years later, it was offered to the Prince of Wales, future Edward VII. But he found there weren't enough woods for his shooting. Then it failed to reach its reserve at auction in 1884, and so my family decided to rent it out to a succession of tenants as a sort of shooting box, and it was then very fashionable in Norfolk because of the Prince of Wales, who'd bought Sandringham next door. So then it wasn't until my grandparents came to Houghton in 1913. They were given the house by my great-grandfather on their marriage, and finally moved in 1918 after the war ended, and it became again a family home. But really, I think you can say this century or more of relatively benign neglect seems to have been very good for the contents of the house. The grand rooms on the piano nobile were rarely opened up, so the colours and the fabrics and tapestries have been amazingly well preserved. Although actually the visitors' book showed that it was visited. There were quite a lot of people on tours of Norfolk who did actually call in throughout the 19th century, and especially late 19th century. Anyway, Houghton has really had its ups and downs, but in many respects it's a rare time capsule. Everything still remarkably intact, except of course for the famous collection of paintings, whose places have now mostly been filled with family portraits. So on that note, and to tell you more about that wonderful collection, Dr. Thierry Morel. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we shouldn't forget that this exhibition wouldn't happen without the extraordinary courage and the determination of Lord Cholmondeley, which I think is admirable. So, Sir Robert Walpole was the son of a Whig landowner in Norfolk, and he dominated British politics between 1715 and 1742, and became known as His Majesty's Prime Minister. In fact, he was the first to hold this position, or this name. He amassed a sizable fortune, notably through his successive appointments as Paymaster General of the Forces and Chancellor of the Exchequer. And he's remembered for having maintained in Britain a wonderful sort of period of peace for over 20 years. He's also the first of the Prime Ministers to reside in 10 Downing Street. I'm sure you're familiar with this photograph. And here's some of the interiors which were recently restored and which were partly designed by William Kent. And this name will come back again. So it is in this house that Sir Robert resided, but he had also another two houses, one in Arlington Street and one in Chelsea, near the hospital. And he had decided to build an extraordinary collection which he displayed in those three houses. And in 1736, there were 150 works in Downing Street. So it was rather sort of an amazement for visitors and politicians alike. So I'm going to, in the course of this talk, I'm going to explain to you how Sir Robert formed this extraordinary collection and how he displayed it. And finally, also, I'm going to tell you what the exhibition is going to be about. Here, I decided to show you the three portraits of his three sons. Guess you can see Robert, Edward, and Horace. Horace was described by Lord Cholmondeley earlier. What's interesting is the three of them, at least the last two, Edward and Horace, had an artistic inclination, and the three sons were also well travelled and also well read, and Sir Robert sent them to Italy for the Grand Tour. The wonderful Laocoon that you see by François Girardon is one of the treasured possessions of Sir Robert, and this is a piece that his first son Robert acquired in Paris, but of course it was a copy of the famous Laocoon, which was in Rome, one of the most celebrated ancient sculptures that there was, and it's also one of the most prized bronzes in the house. It is actually displayed in the Royal Academy up until this week at the bronze exhibition, and this piece was bought at an extraordinary price of 1,000 guineas, which was a considerable amount at the time. Sir Robert also used the services of agents all over Europe to find the best possible masterpieces, not just sculptures, but principally paintings. So, and besides that, he also had cronies and allies who decided to give him very, very important presents. So this is a copy of the Borghese Gladiator by Le Sueur, which was given to Sir Robert by the Earl of Pembroke, and is now sort of adorning the staircase of Houghton. This piece was offered to Sir Robert on his 64th birthday by yet another agent, but a very, very important agent called Horace Mann. He was an ambassador at the court at the court of Florence, a British ambassador at the court of Florence, but he was also distantly related to Sir Robert, and also acted as a mentor to the young Horace, and they were very, very fond of each other, both father and son vis-à-vis as Horace Mann. So now I'm going to go through the type of pictures that Sir Robert acquired, and also how he acquired them. He had an extraordinary instinct for pictures, and decided to acquire the pictures from very interesting sources. You have here a portrait of Green Gibbons. And Green Gibbons had also a collection of works of art. And when he died in 1723, Sir Robert purchased a number of his works, of the works at a sale. And one of them is this magnificent Luca Giordano, with a marvelous sort of powerful light effect and rich tonality, very much inspired by the likes of Ribera in Naples. Here is a wonderful Franz Hals, which is coming from the National Gallery in Washington. So the Flemish school was very well represented. And this is the famous series of pictures by Franz Snyders that Sir Robert particularly liked. So he bought 8 of them. And they are all of them in the same room in the Hermitage now. A famous Rembrandt, the portrait of an old woman, which at the time was thought to be the portrait of Rembrandt's wife, but it was later thought it isn't. Marvelous Rubens, and the famous Van Dyck, sort of the portrait of Henry Danvers and Sir Thomas Wharton. So a number of pictures were also purchased from the collections of grand families all over England and Europe. In this case, it was the collection of the Whartons, who had a fabulous, had commissioned many pictures by Van Dyck at the time when he was living in England and was working for Charles I. So this, it's also quite interesting for a man of his time, I'm talking about Sir Robert now, to buy works and portraits, notably of members of other families. But he was such a good collector that he realized that what mattered is the quality of the pictures. And indeed, as you can see, those works are among Van Dyck's best. So Inigo Jones. So he was interested in the portraits of artists as well, sort of. This is one of the treasures of the collection. It's one of the paintings that for which Sir Robert was prepared to pay the highest amount of money. And this picture is quite important also because it belonged to one of the to Chanteloup, who was one of Poussin's most important patrons, and it was produced in Rome at the time. It's rather monumental as well in scale. Sir Robert was also said to have a quite eclectic taste and a Catholic taste, I must say. He wasn't so much a religious man. At least we don't we don't have any testimonies of this. But he loved religious pictures, and in fact had a particular affection for the Spanish and Italian schools. We'll see this picture in another context a bit later. But again, this picture was found actually in Spain by an agent, and the agent had to look for the best version of this Immaculate Conception, of which Murillo produced a number of compositions. This is a portrait that you probably have seen a few times in books, at least, and in fact there are several versions of this Pope, Innocent X. The prime version is in Rome at the Palazzo Doria Pamphili. It's the picture that inspired Francis Bacon to do his series on the popes, and we know of others. They were sort of recorded. He did lots of studies and produced the most extraordinary likeness and expression. As you can see, I mean, you feel you have the character in front of you. The collection also included works of rather sort of earlier times, sort of 16th century, is well represented. Although, strangely, Sir Robert only had one Titian, or at least he thought it was a Titian, but this picture now is not ascribed to Titian any longer. One of the reasons also why he was so keen to obtain those pictures from prestigious and important collections is that at the time it was one way of ensuring that the attribution of the pictures, because of the family history, and because copies existed in in vast quantities. So this is a very, very marvelous portrait also of Carlo Maratta. And Carlo Maratta was one of his favorite artists. In fact, several letters mentioned from agents saying, "Oh, I've seen some of the pictures of your favorite artist, Carlo Maratta." And Carlo Maratta lived quite long, but he was the most fashionable artist of the 18th century in Rome, 17th and 18th century. And he also had many talents. One of them was to be a restorer, or at least not to be a restorer, but he's the one chiefly responsible for saving the frescoes, Raphael frescoes, at the Farnesina. Nobody knows that, or at least I didn't know. And his technique was so revolutionary that it's still some restorers try to remove his techniques in Farnesina, and then they realized that actually was the only way to preserve Raphael's frescoes. But then there's another interesting link is the Pope Clement IX that we see here is also the Pope who commissioned Bernini to produce the wonderful angels sculptures on statues on the Ponte Sant'Angelo, opposite the Castel Sant'Angelo. And as you know, there's a fabulous exhibition at the Met just now with those sculptures, or the Bozzetti for it. So it's a rather nice link. So he loved, Sir Robert loved Maratta so much that in fact he dedicated an entire room of Houghton to the work of Maratta and his disciples. And this probably is the only room in the world to include so many masterpieces by Carlo Maratta. And we'll see that again when the exhibition takes place. Romanelli's pupil of Maratta. So the collection, of course, encompassed other media, and notably, so this is for instance a set of dinner plates and of the East India Company that Sir Robert commissioned himself with a Walpole coat of arms, but also marvelous silver. And for the silver, Sir Robert commissioned the best silversmiths of the time, and notably Paul de la Mairie, who was a Huguenot working in England, and also Lukin. And these two wonderful wine coolers are today in the Metropolitan, and they are, I think, among the best wine coolers I've ever seen of the time. Now, in order to display his collection, I should say that, first of all, Sir Robert inherited in 1700, when he was 24, the estate of Houghton, which didn't look at all like this. And he commissioned the best architects of the day, Gibbs and Campbell, to create a temple for his collection. And here is a design of this temple, and this temple is Houghton. So this design has been produced by Isaac Ware in preparation for a series of engravings that were done later. The house, as you can see, has a Palladian style, and is set particularly elegantly in the beautiful park of Houghton. So this is the west front and the views of the park. So when I mentioned the word temple, I didn't invent it. In fact, this word was used by Walpole himself. And we are here in the stone hall. And the stone hall, as you can see, is filled with ancient sculptures. and many of them are sculptures, are statues of various emperors, and notably Marcus Aurelius. This is a drawing of the fireplace in the stone hall. But as you can see, and this is a wonderful relief and bust by Michael Reisbrach, an artist that Sir Robert was particularly fond of. And in this particular ensemble, you can see how Sir Robert is almost represent himself as a senator of ancient times. So obviously the idea of a temple to the glory of the family and of his name was clearly in his mind. So he spent an extraordinary fortune on this house, and in fact it's probably the reason why towards the end of his life the family had a huge amount of debt. I'm showing you here a plan of the rooms so that you get a better sense of where the rooms are going to be, and you can see so they're all sort of labeled, and this is exactly how the house is today. It's an elevation where you can see the stone hall in the middle. The interiors of Houghton were designed by William Kent. William Kent was an extraordinary artist, very versatile. He started as a coach painter and then became one of the most fashionable but also most talented architects and designers of the time. He worked for the king, and notably at Kensington Palace, where he designed some of the interiors, but also for Lord Burlington. And the interiors of Burlington House are now sort of adjacent to the Royal Academy. And he was also a painter, so he decorated the ceiling here of the saloon, which is the largest and grandest room in Houghton. But he didn't limit himself to designing the interiors. In fact, what's particularly extraordinary about Houghton is that we know that William Kent had a profound knowledge of the collection, and he designed Houghton with that in mind. So effectively, all of the interiors that you see at Houghton were conceived for the collection, which is a very unusual thing. Most of the time you have a castle, an edifice, and then a collection is accommodated bon gré mal gré in the castle. But in this case, those pictures had a particular place in the house. So this is the saloon today in its present state. But he also created the furniture for the house. And this furniture, as Lord Cholmondeley said, is still intact and in the house. And the café you can see in the background of this rather ravishing sconce is also the same café that was used by Sir Robert in the 1730s. So it's still the original fabric on the wall. So what was also fascinating is to realize how Sir Robert and his son were not only fond of each other but also fond of the collection, and Horace Walpole decided to create what we call the Aedes Walpoleanae, which is a sort of he published a catalogue of the collection, and this catalogue is composed of mezzotints and prints of the masterpieces in the collection, so about 154 prints of the major paintings. It's a portrait of Hélène Fourment by Rubens, which is now, the picture is now at the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon. The Van Dycks that you saw earlier, and the Rembrandt. and the Rembrandt. So now, sadly, in 1745, Sir Robert died, and he left his collection to his son. And his son didn't survive him very long, and died on the 31st of March, 1751. Therefore, the collection passed on, or the collection and the house passed on to his grandson, Lord Orford. And Horace wrote something about Lord Orford, and he said, "I flatter myself that he would restore some lustre to our house, but his whole pleasure is outrageous exercise. He loves nobody but himself, yet neglects every view of fortune or ambition. In short, it's impossible not to love him when one sees him, impossible to esteem him when one thinks of him." And sadly, Lord Orford proved to be a disaster for the collection. And he gambled the collection away more or less towards the end of the 18th century, and it had to be sold. In fact, he decided to sell it, and used the assistance of James Christie, the founder of Christie's, to first of all to appraise the collection and then to sell it. And James Christie suggested that possibly the best possible buyer for the collection might be Catherine the Great of Russia, whose fortune was known to everybody at the time. And Lord Orford at the time said also, was very cautious though. He wanted to observe the most profound secrecy about his design. However, the news of the possible sale of the collection, the news of the possible sale of the collection drew the attention of a famous MP called John Wilkes, and he made a speech in Parliament to draw attention to the sale and prompt the British Museum to acquire it. And he said, "It is an opportunity to acquire one of the best collections in Europe, of a knowledge superiority to most in Italy, and scarcely inferior even to the Duke of Orleans in the Palais Royal in Paris. And I firmly hope it will not be dispersed." However, the collection was finally sold, and we have here an account of the then ambassador of Russia in England, who said, "Your Majesty," he wrote to Catherine the Great, "Your Majesty has perhaps heard of the collection of paintings of the celebrated Robert Walpole. His grandson, Lord Orford, is taking the liberty of placing it, or placing everything or part of it, at your Majesty's feet. It is worthy, in the opinion of all connoisseurs, of belonging to one of the greatest sovereigns." And this is actually the original copy of an article that was published in 1779 at the news of the sale. And as you can see, the terms are rather strong. We are informed that, much to the dishonor of this country, the celebrated collection of pictures of Sir Robert Walpole is actually purchased by the Empress of Russia for £40,000. So this was a considerable amount of money, although one could argue that had the pictures been sold individually, they would have fetched a much higher price. And today, should anybody would wish to acquire such a collection, it would set him back, or her back, for a few $billion. And here is a different copy of the Ides Walpoleanae, which belonged to Catherine the Great. And as you can see, it's dedicated to Catherine the Great. So here we are. And as you can see, you can find the lines sort of Her Emperor Majesty, the Empress of Russia, all Russias, lately in the collection of the Earl of Orford. So, and this edition I think is 1780. So the collection left England in a ship called Natalia. And the Russians knew very well what they were doing. And in fact, a guidebook of the early 19th century stated, England will never retrieve such a lost opportunity of establishing the National Gallery worthy of its rank as a civilized nation. The present endeavors at the formation of one, tardy as the scheme may seem to many, are praiseworthy. And whatever, so that's yes. But he said yes. But the chance of at once possessing chef-d'œuvre of so many celebrated masters and for so trifling a sum will never again occur. So that's what the Russians said in the early 19th century. So now here we are in the Hermitage Museum today, and you can see this picture here, which is a wonderful Salvatore Rosa, the prodigal son, in the gallery which were designed in the 1850s by Leo Glenze. Here's a wonderful picture by Luca Giordano, which is one of the largest to come to the exhibition. And now I would like to tell you how what the exhibition is going to be like, or the experience of organizing it. These are documents, or books rather, at Houghton, containing the inventories of the collection. And what's quite remarkable about the collection is that we know exactly where the pictures were displayed and located. As you can see, this list is very precise. And when Lord Cholmondeley inherited Houghton 20 years ago, he found in the drawer of the library, of a desk in the library, so the desk of Sir Robert, a series of drawings showing the display of some of the rooms, some of the paintings in the rooms. And together with those accounts, those inventories, it is actually possible to recreate the hang as it was in the 18th century. And it is what we are trying to do. Here is the Marble Parlor, which is a dining room, and it's one of the first dining rooms to be created as such. There was, prior to that, tables would be set up in various rooms of a castle or palace, but this is designed by William Kent and one of the first dining rooms to exist. So in this room, on the right-hand side, you'll have the Van Dyck portrait that I showed you earlier of the Earl of Danby. So this is the type of recreation that we're doing. You can see the two portraits by Van Dyck, Campidoglio still lifes, and the Veronese pictures on either side of the other Van Dyck. Here we are in this is the green velvet bedchamber, and look at the frame here. This is a room where a picture by Poussin, the Holy Family you saw earlier, is going to be displayed. It was the original location of the Poussin, and this frame was actually, we discovered, is the frame that originally was the frame of the Poussin. So the Hermitage has agreed for the picture to return in its original frame. And the frame will be, so the Poussin will be replaced, redisplayed in this room. Here it is. Here is a saloon, and you can see the drawings by William Kent. Those drawings actually were preparatory. Kent didn't intend they were sort of projects. And as when the pictures arrived for good in 1743 at Houghton, the display changed. And so we're going to recreate as best as possible the display that was created in 1743 when Sir Robert decided to reside in Houghton. This room is what the room was called at the time, the Kalamata Room. And it is where you will see in May about 13 works by Kalamata and another 10 by other masters, followers of Maratha. And this room was traditionally covered in red velvet. So again, for the exhibition, we're going to recreate the original covering, sort of the original red velvet, sort of the green velvet on the wall. This is a beautiful sort of silk fabric which was given by the Prince of Wales to the then Lord Cholmondeley in the very beginning of the 19th century, but so the appearance of the room will change back to its appearance in the 18th century. This is another picture by Kalamata, Assis and Galatea, and we discovered at the Metropolitan Museum a drawing of this picture. And it's particularly interesting because this drawing is not by Maratha, but by William Kent. And in fact, this tells us that we know that William Kent traveled to Italy, but this tells us that William Kent saw this picture in either the studio of Maratha or in a private collection, and drew it as a ricordo so that he could send it to Sir Robert and ask his opinion. And sure enough, Sir Robert decided to purchase the painting. And for the first time since that day, the picture and the drawing will be not in the same room, but at Houghton. This is the cabinet, and this is where the portrait of Hélène Fourment by Rubens was displayed on a mantelpiece. And we measured the mirror of the mantelpiece and realized that actually the measurements are exact, are precisely the measurement of the painting. So in fact, this was the original frame for the Rubens. The picture will not come back to Houghton because it's too fragile. It's on panel, so it's not really reasonable for it to travel. But we will have a reproduction made, so we'll install it in instead to give at least the impression that picture would have given at the time. So here we are in Russia, in Tsarskoye Selo, or Catherine Palace, on the outskirts of Saint Petersburg. It's more famously known for being the place where the amber rooms were located. But of course, during the war, they were destroyed or they were dismantled and then lost. So I'll give you a few views. And the reason why I'm showing you those the pictures of Tsarskoye Selo is because some of the pictures that were sent to Russia were not necessarily kept at the Hermitage. Only 156 pictures out of the 201 that were sent to Russia ended up at the Hermitage. Are at the Hermitage today. Throughout the 20th century, a few of the pictures were dispatched either during the 30s or just before the war to various other museums. The Pushkin Museum, Tsarskoye Selo, Pavlovsk, and other museums. And here, this picture in the middle of the ceiling is actually a picture of Kalamata. It's the pendant of the Assis Egalite that I showed you earlier. And it's a very, very large picture. It's about 3 meters long, or sort of 10, 12 feet, I think. And I don't know if this picture gives you an idea of the size, of the height of the ceiling, but it's about 40 meters, considerably high. And we've tried to, at least we asked for this picture for the exhibition. And obviously you imagine the reaction of the director. The reaction was a bit sort of, yes, surprised at first, and also kind of shocked. I said, why? When we explained a bit further the raison d'être of our request, I think they still understood, but they were not convinced. And it took about 2 or 3 trips to convince the director and the curators. In fact, the curators were convinced first, the director later, to lend this picture for the exhibition. So a gigantic scaffold is going to be erected in this staircase, and the picture will be taken down, replaced by a photograph, and travel all the way to Houghton in April. And the other picture, the Assis and Galatea, is actually in the border of Siberia. So those 2 pictures are the most difficult ones to obtain. But they were sort of facing each other in the Kalamata Room, so they will have an extraordinary impact when back at Houghton. So here is a detail. It's not very clear, but this is the ceiling. The fact also that the pictures, some of the pictures were particularly favored by some of the emperors and successors of Catherine. And on the left, you can, I suppose you can recognize the Murillo. And here is another version of the Murillo, a copy. And this copy was made for the Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, was the wife of Alexander II. And she was so fond of this picture that she decided to have it copied twice. And not only that, but the picture was also, the original picture was installed in her boudoir, and I'll show you a photograph of that. This is the original picture. And what's very exciting also is a few of the pictures, not many, but a few of the pictures have kept their original frame. And this is a frame designed by William Kent. The picture is at the Hermitage, and it will return like this, back in its original frame, on its original wall. The chapel, by the way, was at Pavlovsk, and this is another room, the gallery in Pavlovsk, where another picture, the picture on the top, Matteo Ponzone will be coming as well. Here is some of the interiors of the Hermitage, and then you see on the left-hand side the Winter Palace, and on the right-hand side what we call the new Hermitage, which was designed to, because the collection was so gigantic that and also the emperors wanted to open it to the public. So it was one of the first. It was opened in the 1850s. And this is the boudoir of the Empress, where you can see the picture. I suppose what I forgot to tell you is how impatient Catherine the Great was to receive those pictures. She was so impatient that she wrote dozens of letters to the ambassador in London and said, "When are the pictures arriving?" She couldn't wait for them to arrive. And as soon as they did arrive, the crates were brought to her Hermitage, and she displayed them on the wall or against the wall on the floor. That was the fate of these pictures. Sorry. Yeah. Oops. I'm sorry, but well. So yes, that's the picture I wanted. So perfect. So I'm coming to the conclusion of this short presentation to say that in 1779 the pictures were sent to Saint Petersburg, and Lord Orford, who himself was particularly well-minded towards Catherine the Great, and he said he decided to call his dog the Tsarina in homage to her. And likewise, the Empress, as a gesture of goodwill, decided to send a portrait of herself to Lord Orford. And this portrait is still standing here in a saloon, defiant. The Lord Horace Walpole, on the other hand, wasn't particularly pleased by the sale, and he had about 50 adjectives or names to describe Catherine the Great, and one of them was the Fury of the North. It is particularly exciting to know that in now nearly 6 months, a substantial portion of the collection is going to return on the walls of Houghton, and I think that it's going to be a rather sort of historic moment, and I really hope that all of you are going to be able to enjoy it and be able to visit this exhibition. It's not an exhibition; it's an installation. It's a recreation, and I think it's also an interesting as a twist. Horace Walpole was so appalled about this sale that he declared, when I think that this collection is going to be sent to these wooden palaces in the North Pole and be subjected to the dangers of fires and destruction and revolutions. Well, he was not wrong about the revolutions, but against all odds, the collection was incredibly well preserved in Russia for the past 200 years, or 235 years. And had it remained at Houghton, a large proportion of it would have been destroyed, because the gallery of the gallery of pictures, which is in one of the wings of Houghton, was destroyed in a fire in 1789. So it's a strange twist of fate that not only the collection is preserved for the joy of public of Russia, but all over the world, and it's going to return to Houghton. So I think Horace and Sir Robert would be pleased to see that from above. Thank you very much.